Good afternoon. Welcome to this lunchtime lunch and learn webinar. It will start in a moment and we'll aim to finish at 2 o'clock. So welcome to two fantastic speakers, Aseia and Vanisha, who will introduce themselves fully in a moment. So over to you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you. So yeah, there's two of us. We're from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team. Myself, Aseia, and also a colleague you may have come across, Sean. And our session today is going to be on disability in the legal profession and give you some information about work that we've been doing with the profession on this topic. And of course, I know wellbeing is really important to women in law. Disability includes women in law. I know Sally's asked you to mute your mics, but I was going to ask you a question and I wondered if you could just answer. What percentage of lawyers do you think are disabled in the legal profession? Does anyone know? Would anyone like to guess?
10%?
What was that, sorry?
10%?
10%. Any other guesses?
I know the answer because of my book, so I'm not going to say anything.
Actually, a lot of people do say 10%, but because we collect diversity data every 2 years, and our data suggests, well, our data tells us it's only 3%, but we know that there's going to be more than 3% in the legal profession that do have the disability. They're just not declaring that they have a disability. They're not telling their employers that they have a mental health problem or a physical disability, particularly because there's about, depending which figures you look at, 10% of the working population are disabled. So there's a massive underreporting in the legal profession. I wanted to ask another question about, in your opinion, what you thought was the most important element of promoting disability inclusion within firms. So I've got 3 options that you could choose from. It could be senior leadership, training, or good occupational health. Did anyone have a view, or anything else they might think is important in promoting disability inclusion?
I would go with senior leadership, because I think if you have someone at the top who clearly demonstrates that they're supportive of disability in the workforce, then people feel open about raising issues relevant to their disability and adapting their work processes.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anyone else have a view? So these are some of the themes that came across in our engagement with firms, some of the things that people told us when we went out to firms. But I'll let Aseia tell you just give you some background.
So one of the things Vanisha mentioned was that 3% of solicitors declare they have a disability, and that in the working age population that's approximately 10%. But there is another statistic, and it is a government statistic, and it says that 19% of the working age population have a disability. So there's a huge discrepancy between what lawyers, solicitors are telling us and what is actually represented outside the legal profession. So we, knowing that, felt that we really needed to do something to engage with this subject and to try and engage with law firms and the profession as a whole to show that actually disability inclusion is a really important topic, and that we do need to talk about it, and we do need to get people to engage with it. We want to make sure, obviously, that the legal profession is diverse and inclusive. And through some of our work, we went out to visit law firms, for example, and we found that there were lots of programs on like gender equality, which is really important, LGBT plus equality, some programs on intersecting equalities, BAME and women, for example. But there was hardly anything around disability inclusion. And we've been talking about disability over the last 40, 50, 60 years. And I think some of the inclusive practices still need to be implemented within law firms. And I think in terms of recognising the benefits that disabled employees can bring to the workforce, I think it's really important. So we wanted to identify what good practice looks like, what law firms have been doing, what they have been putting in place, and identifying what can be done and what that journey looks like. And I think one of the first points of that journey is at recruitment. And I think it is recognising people's ability rather than looking at their disability, because that's it, in general, that's with people across all kinds of competencies and abilities. We're all good at things, and we're not so good at other things. And that's the same for people that are disabled, and that they might need a bit of additional support, and it could be through, for example, like IT or artificial technology. But it doesn't mean that they're not good at their job. There's some, just in general, potentially need a bit more support, and in light of things like reasonable adjustments, for example. We know that less is being done around disability, and we know that because of how many people declare that they have a disability. And we just want to change. We want to change the needle on the conversation around disability. And I think sometimes employers, they might find it a little bit difficult to start and open up the conversation. And I think some of it's because they're afraid of getting it wrong. But I think for us, it's really important that we facilitate that conversation. We talk to people. What are the support what kinds of support do you need? And that goes across for all employees, for all staff. And I think when we open up that conversation, I think in terms of making that workplace more inclusive, I think it's really important.
So shall I just give some background as to what we did? So we surveyed, and we 3,000 law firms, and we asked them about their policies, their practices, and what they're doing on disability inclusion. Engagement also includes disabled people within the legal profession, so disabled solicitors, experts on disability, and also law firms. So we had a real good mixture of views and input into our research. We also looked at what research was already existing in this field. And as you can imagine, and as Aseia has alluded, not very much has been done previously in looking at disability in the legal profession. So what we found in our engagement with the firms is, I think most firms, and you probably will find this in your own experience, it'd be good to hear at the end what you think, but most firms do want to do the right thing and are committed to promoting inclusion and disability inclusion. And we try to elicit some best practice and good practice from firms, and they gave us, so we had some firms that gave us case studies on what they had done and what had worked well for their firms. We've got some videos from disabled solicitors about how their firm supported them, and the idea around that was to give other firms and other individuals a confidence to make positive changes for their firm. And all that is on our website, and at the end of this call, Aseia and I can send Sally the links which will take you to our web pages, where you can see all the case studies and all the videos that people have provided to us. In all that engagement, and this took place over most of the end of 2019 and 2020. Most of 2019 and 2020. What we found was there was lots of good practice, but there were some firms that perhaps weren't doing as much as they wanted to do, or needed that extra support. So the themes that we talked about in our final report, or the themes that came out of our engagement, were around senior leadership. Reasonable adjustments was a massive sticking point for some firms. Recruitment, retention, progression, role models and networks, and training and learning. And we've produced a report, and our report is centered around those themes. Reasonable adjustments was a huge discussion point for many individuals who had disabilities, and again that includes people who have mental health problems as well. It was a discussion point for firms. Firms felt needed more confidence around making reasonable adjustments, and as you can imagine, disability experts had views on them as well. Maybe Aseia wants to talk about reasonable adjustments and our findings.
Yeah, I think for some people as well, they were worried about asking for reasonable adjustments. One, again, they didn't want to be felt that they were doing less than their colleagues, even though that they weren't. And they wanted their firm to support them and open up that dialogue as well. So it's in a way, it's a two-way process. The responsibility shouldn't be on the individual with a disability asking for reasonable adjustment. It should be with both. It should be with the firm opening up the discussion and then facilitating that conversation with the person. And there were worries about things like billable hours. There were worries about things around technology, how an individual could access technology to do their job well. And in some firms, I think it was the direct kind of conversation with their line manager that supported those reasonable adjustments, rather than kind of a firm ethos. I remember one firm saying that, well, actually we've asked our colleagues to complete this questionnaire, and we've asked them to give us this information, this data, and one of the individuals we spoke to said, well, they're not able to even access that questionnaire because of the disability that they have. So technology needs to be inclusive of the people that we are working with too. And if we can facilitate that, which isn't hard, but it does need to happen, I think that's one of the issues that firms need to think about. And it is challenging, but in terms of reasonable adjustments, it's about not being afraid to talk about it. It is a legal requirement. Firms, employers have to be proactive in providing reasonable adjustments. And often I think the case is that if they don't talk about it, then they don't have to worry about it. But what we're saying as an organisation, as a regulator, that it is important to open up that conversation about reasonable adjustments. And it's not in this kind of new ways of working, for example. I know a lot of disabled people have said, look, we would like to work from home a few more days. We'd like to have flexible working hours, flexible working patterns. And then suddenly we have a coronavirus, which everybody is at home, and we're all working flexibly. We're all working from home. We're able to do some of our jobs, our roles. So these are things that can happen, that can be put into place. And I think sometimes it's the culture of an organisation that restricts that, and is trying to open up that conversation that things are able to happen. It doesn't mean that if you have flexible working, then it's just, for example, you have one day a week off, a Thursday or a Friday. Flexibility can work around the individual. And I think it's just about opening up ways in which firms can do that for their staff. I think there is a firm, Thrive Law. I think some of you have heard of that. And I think they've got rid of billable hours, and they support their staff in different ways in terms of mental health and well-being as well. So it can be a challenge, but it's not a challenge that is not able to be overcome. And I think one of the other things that we picked up is that law firms weren't monitoring. They don't monitor the data on reasonable adjustments, and they don't monitor the data of people who require adjustment or who have a disability. And they don't track that change, they don't track how employees progress. So in terms of progressing, coming into work at a firm, and then working their way up to senior leadership, they're not tracking that. So they can't see what that data is telling them. And I think, again, to understand the profile of your workforce, you need to identify what that workforce is doing and how that looks throughout the firm. And that's especially important at the recruitment stage and through different stages of progression throughout the firm. Otherwise, we're not able to see who in the law firm is progressing, how quickly they progress, and are we taking their skills and attitudes into account and supporting that progression as well. And I think that's one of the things that disabled people were telling us, disabled solicitors, is that yes, they can progress, but sometimes they feel that it is at a slower point than their peers. And they feel that sometimes they're not able to articulate the support that they need because of potential like bias or prejudice. So yeah, I think it's a work in progress, and something that law firms are hopefully considering in terms of making that culture more inclusive for everyone.
I think some of the things that we found, and you'll probably find this as well, is that there seems to be a lot more of a focus on mental health and well-being, which is of course something that we encourage, and quite rightly so. But then that suppresses perhaps the disability narrative, and so there's not much being done around disability inclusion per se. And what we found in our engagement with firms and individuals, firms are doing fantastic things on promoting well-being and mental health. There's so many sessions on raising awareness, celebrating Mental Health Awareness Week, or World Mental Health Day in October. There's so much going on around that, but less so around disability. And I think that's where some of the frustration was lying for disabled solicitors. Not to say that we shouldn't do that, of course we should, we should also recognise that there are other disabilities and other reasonable adjustments. And on the point of reasonable adjustments that Aseia was talking about, some of the reasonable adjustments that can be made are not very costly at all. And probably common sense, simple things that can be put into place. But for some reason, firms, not all firms, of course, but some firms just struggle with making those provisions. And for someone who, for example, who does have mental health problems, such as anxiety, it could be as simple as adjusting start and finish times in the day. That could really make a huge positive impact on that person's day. And that might be seen as that person slacking, or they're lazy, or, you know, all these negative stereotypes and connotations that come with making reasonable adjustments, you know, which just aren't true. I think the point that came through in our findings and talking to disabled solicitors is everyone wants to do a good job in the legal profession. It's just enabling individuals to be the best that they can be in a style that suits them. And I think that cuts across not just for disability, but for everybody.
And I think that's the same in terms of, for example, like training and learning. When we held a couple of workshops, and we had disabled solicitors and organisations, law firms come and talk to us. And they said that training actually is really important on disability, mental health and well-being, but that training shouldn't be just delivered once a year, or a shoehorn e-learning package that somebody has to complete in like 10 minutes. It should be a regular training that is updated, and it shouldn't be done by HR, or it shouldn't be done by people who think they know what they're talking about. It should be done together with disabled people leading the training and leading the learning, because they're the people that experience their world for how they know it and for the barriers that they experience, and they could train other people to understand what some of those barriers and issues might be for themselves. And again, it is something sometimes like simple things. I think there was one solicitor who said actually they wanted their work to be given to them at the beginning of the day, so that they would have from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock to finish that. But often a lot of their work was given to them at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the evening, and they had to spend the whole day just doing nothing and then getting this work towards the end of the day. And even though as a person that was disabled, this is, again, it cuts across for everyone, to be honest. They just wanted that work to be given to them earlier on in the day, and that request was refused. And they weren't even allowed to take that work home with them. It was presenteeism. So we can see, again, as I mentioned earlier, we can see that things can change, but it's important to take those factors into consideration and make sure that disabled people, disabled solicitors lead the way in training and learning about what things can change and how things can change. And that links into things like role models and networks. Again, we've seen law firms have staff networks, have disability staff networks, and it's colleagues from probably from the lower ends, not senior levels of the business. But we need people from across the business, senior leaders, plus managers, plus people, paralegals, for example. We need everybody to facilitate that staff network. You can't just have a group of people on a particular level trying to drive that forward. It does need leadership from the top, as well as kind of a bottom-up and top-down linking together. And sometimes it might be that one individual drives that change, and that is really great because it shows the passion, the drive of an individual. But again, that's a lot of responsibility. And I think to kind of encourage that change, I think law firms and senior leaders within that law firm need to role model and support that change and facilitate that change.
I think so at the end of our engagement and talking to firms, we did have some top tips that we put in our report, and won't read them all out to you now, but I think at the end of this call, it would be good to send Sally, and Sally, if you could forward it on to everyone on the call, the presentation, and in there we've surmised some of the top tips, but we'll also send you the link of where you can find the report and the page which talks about, which I mentioned before, with the case studies and the videos. And there might be just things that you could do in terms of communicating that in your own firms. This is what the SRA is doing, this is what they've found. And that might be a good conversation starter. It'd be good to hear, you know, what people who are on the call today, what their experiences of disability inclusion, not to name and shame any firms, but just a general conversation about what's happening in their firm, what good practice is, or where perhaps they might need more support.
Great. So is that the end of your presentation?
So I think it is. I think the top tips, some of the things that we can think about is around like senior leaders demonstrating support and leadership, managers initiating conversations, and making sure that we promote values and behaviours that specifically mention disability equality. So not just equality, diversity, inclusion in general, but disability equality. I think if where a law firm is involved in outsourcing recruitment, then they need to engage with their recruiter to make sure that people who come with different needs, who are disabled, who might have mental health issues, are not discarded at first point. Because I know there has been some instances where law firms haven't specified what they want from their recruiter, and their recruiter has taken it on themselves just to dismiss people who don't fit into the kind of stereotypical mold that they think or they perceive that law firm is looking for. So that takes away maybe a third, a half of like people that might apply for roles. And I think it's really important again to make sure that there's a match between the law firm and the people that they work with to recruit individuals into the firm. So we've published videos and case studies from law firms in terms of good practice, and a good practice report on our website. And we're more than open in terms of kind of adding to that information and providing more information to the profession as a whole. And if people wanted to get involved in that, or wanted to kind of give us information about good practice, what's happened at their law firms, what's worked well, we're happy to have that conversation and to capture that, and also to kind of promote that too. So we're looking to do later on, probably in the year, a social media campaign about some of these top tips. And again, as Vanisha said, it is specific to disability because we wanted to put a spotlight on disability, well-being, mental health, but it does intersect across all of the other equality areas. And especially, I know, like we're talking to like women in law, and again, it's that conversation around flexible working, it's that conversation around part-time working, agile working practices, and it's trying to make that like the norm rather than the abnormal. So I think it's just trying to change the conversation, that the way things have always been done doesn't necessarily have to be like that, and that people are productive in terms of the way that they can engage with their work in the time that they have to do that.
I think it might be worth mentioning at this point that we're launching an equality, diversity and inclusion mentoring scheme. So if there are firms here that might feel that they would benefit from being mentored by firms on equality, diversity and inclusion, it's a scheme that's was pre-COVID-19 was being launched, but we're still going ahead with it. And it's based on a model that we did last year, where we ran LGBT mentoring schemes, where some of the bigger firms mentor some of the smaller firms on promoting LGBT inclusion in their firms. And what we found there was that some firms felt that whilst LGBTQ+ was an area they wanted to promote, that actually there was some just general equality and diversity things that they might have wanted to put in place first. So we've got some big firms on board who will be mentor firms. I'm on a call, there we go. Sorry, my daughter's just walked in. Who will be supporting. They don't necessarily have to be smaller firms, small, medium-sized firms who may want to support, who may want support from bigger firms, and it's 2 hours free a month of mentoring, and you can ask questions, you can learn from those firms about what they're putting in place to promote equality, diversity, inclusion, and of course in that is well-being and mental health as well. If anyone's interested, perhaps Sally, you could take their details and we can contact them, so we can give you more information about the mentoring scheme.
Firstly, then, let's do a virtual clap for our brilliant speakers.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I know that this was advertised as talking about well-being, equality and diversity, not specifically disability, but I think that session has been interesting to see from your point of view as solicitors. I'm at the bar and most of our members are solicitors, to see what the regulator is doing.